Hello, everyone that is getting into the webinar. We just opened it up, so we'll wait just a minute or two to make sure everyone is in and ready to go before we get started. For those of you that are in the webinar already, we did send out an email yesterday with a PDF of the slide presentation along with two handouts. And I am adding those into the chat in Zoom, just in case you didn't get that email, you can reference those there. Just gonna give everyone another minute. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the overview of the annual report requirements for GAAP local governments. My name is Kaylee Paggio, and with me today is Christy Kogel. We are both on the local government support team here at the State Auditor's Office. We're excited to be here today to provide you with an overview of the annual report requirements to help you get started in filing your reports. So before we get into the fun stuff, we do have a couple housekeeping items to go over. This live webinar is being recorded so that we can publish it later on our trainings and workshops page. Usually it takes a few weeks to get that published, so just keep that in mind. Now, just a reminder, this training is not eligible for CPE. We do have some exercises throughout the training to help promote engagement and confirm knowledge of the learning objectives. These are not required, but can be helpful in getting those learning objectives to stick and put them into practice, especially for real life examples and situations. In addition to that, we also have some polling questions that we've sprinkled in throughout the training. Again, these are just designed to keep us engaged because we all know virtual training can be hard to stay engaged and active. So we try to keep it as interactive as possible. Once the webinar ends, a survey will open in a separate web browser, and it's just two questions. What is something you liked about today's training, and what is something you think we can improve on for next time? We always appreciate you taking the time to provide feedback so that we can continue producing quality trainings for local governments. Now, there are some Zoom specific things to keep in mind during the training. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the training, and you can submit these questions through the Q&A button on your Zoom webinar panel. If you don't see that icon, click the More button on your Zoom panel and then click the Q&A icon. That will add it to your webinar panel. This should be used to ask questions to us as the speakers. And you don't have to use the Q&A for answers to the exercise questions or polling questions. Now, just kind of keep this in mind. The scope of this training is the annual report. So if your question is more of a unique situation or might require some more research, we may refer you to the help desk so that we can connect after the training. Then you should also see a chat button on your Zoom webinar panel. This is where you will submit answers to the exercise questions. Now, the polling questions will be a pop-up with answer options to select. We'll demonstrate how that works in just a moment. So again, please remember to submit questions to the speakers through the Q&A button and not the chat feature. It's difficult for us to monitor the chat for questions just because it can get busy in there with the exercises and interaction between the attendees. But you can use the chat to put those answers into the exercise questions. If you prefer to just adjust who can see your chats, just make sure that you, in the to box, you can select the drop down either to send it just to the host, which is us, or everyone if you want that more interactive environment. So one of the primary objectives of this training is connecting the annual report components to resources available in the BARS manual. To achieve this, we have developed exercises throughout the training, as I mentioned. And to participate in these exercises, we do recommend opening a separate web browser now and going to the GAAP BARS manual. This can be accessed from our homepage, sao.wa.gov, and then under the BARS and Annual Filing tab. So I'll just give you guys a minute to get that set up and just keep that open for the duration of the training. We'll be using it for the different exercises. And just while you guys are getting that open, if you raise your hand, we don't have the ability to unmute. So if you do have a question, please make sure to use the Q&A button so we don't miss you or miss any questions that you need help with. And then I know some of you are probably still getting to the BARS manual. And while you're doing that, we do have our first polling question, and this just will give you an idea of what those look like and what to expect. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our first polling question. So this should be a pop-up box on your window. The question is, how many years have you filed the annual report? And again, these are used just for interactive. It helps us collect information about you all that are here today. And so we usually leave these up for about like 45 seconds and just gather that information. All right, give that about 3 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And what I like about these is we can share the results so you guys can see how majority of people are answering. So we have a really pretty even split today. So a lot of experienced filers, too many to count. I feel that. And then we have a lot of first-time filers, which is great. So welcome. This will be a great training to get started. And then lots of people kind of in that middle area. So thank you for participating in those. All right. So now we are at our agenda. So this is our agenda for today's 2-hour training. First, we have an introduction to what the annual report is. Then we'll get into how to navigate the BARS manual. This will help set us up for the exercises and practicing how to find guidance in the manual. We'll spend majority of time in preparing the annual report components. Then we'll wrap up our training with additional training and resources available to help local governments during the filing process. I don't have it noted, but we will have a 10-minute break about halfway through, give you a chance to refill coffees, water, stand up, make sure you're still awake with us. So now we're going to get into our first agenda item, which is why we are all here today. What is the annual report? The annual report is required for all local governments in the state of Washington, regardless of size or annual revenue. In the most basic definition, the annual report is a compilation of a government's financial activity and other supporting documents, including information about how the government operated for the reporting year. We at the State Auditor's Office develop systems and forms for governments to submit this information to us. We really strive to make the process efficient and streamlined for those local governments. And the requirement to submit the annual report to our office is established in state law and requires reports to be submitted within 150 days after fiscal year end each year. This RCW does require our office to collect financial data from local governments and produce comparative statistics that are available to the public. So that's a really high-level definition of what the annual report is. And for the purpose of today's training, we're going to be focusing on the annual report components that are listed up on your screen. So that includes the Schedule 01, Schedule 9, 15, 16, and then lastly, the financial statement package, which includes the MD&A, notes, and RSI. So these are the components we'll be diving into more and focusing on how to prepare them for the annual report. Now, keep in mind there are other annual report components that may be required based on your specific government type. Since these components only apply to a specific number of governments, and we of course are limited to 2 hours, we won't be covering these in today's training. We do have a section in the BARS manual that covers these components and who they apply to. If you have the PDF of the slides, those links are clickable so that you can quickly access that guidance if you need. We'll talk more about resources at the end of today's training and where to find them. So we'll make sure that you guys know exactly where you can go to find different resources and trainings. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Christy for our next agenda item.
Thank you, Kaylee. So let's learn about navigating the BARS manual and BARS template page. Let's start with the reporting templates. To access the templates, you will go to SAO's website at sao.wa.gov. Select the BARS and annual filing menu, and then go to the BARS reporting templates. This is a snippet of what the BARS reporting templates page looks like. You can find templates for all SAO annual report schedules here, and they are pre-formatted for easy upload to the annual filing system. When looking at the Schedule 01 templates, you'll find a template for all government types except cities, towns, and counties. The reason for this is because they utilize almost the entire chart of accounts and various fund types. After reviewing the available templates, you may notice there's no templates to the notes to the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, also referred to as the CFA. We'll talk more about how to prepare this component later on. The templates are formatted very simply and are really designed as tools to import data into the filing system. The most important thing to remember when using these templates is do not alter the basic format of them. This means do not delete or add any columns, headers, subtotals, etc. You only need to input your information where applicable and then upload it into the filing system. One of the primary focuses of today's training is connecting the use of the reporting templates to the BARS manual, because it's important to understand the instructions for preparing each template, and these instructions are found in the BARS manual. That is a great segue into navigating the BARS manual. To reach the BARS manual, we'll go to the same sao.wa.gov and BARS and annual filing menu, but this time we're going to BARS GAAP manual. Before we start digging into the manual, let's do a quick overview of the four main sections of the BARS manual. They are chart of accounts, budgeting, accounting, and reporting. You can see three of the main sections, budgeting, accounting, and reporting, are the BAR from our BARS acronym. Once you have selected the BARS manual, this is the page you will see. This landing page gives you some background information on the BARS manual. You can also print the manual by clicking the button in the top right corner that says download this manual as PDF. I know some people like to have physical copies to write and highlight on, so that option is there for you. The navigation pane is on the left side of the page. You can see there are four sections we mentioned a minute ago: chart of accounts, budgeting, accounting, reporting. In addition to those, we have the table of contents and alerts and changes. Let's take a look at each of those sections now. Looking at the highlighted box in this section, you will notice the table of contents. This has links for every BARS page and is split into chapters. The chapters are the other areas shown: chart of accounts, budgeting, etc. The last one, alerts and changes, is where we publish changes made to the BARS manual, and we'll talk more about each of those other areas in more detail. First is the chart of accounts, where you'll find all relevant guidance on BARS accounts. For this training, we'll primarily be focused on the BARS account export page, where you can download the full chart of accounts for your government type and basis of accounting. More on this in the next few slides. Other things you can find here include guidance on the basic structure of a BARS code, what different categories of codes are, revenue sources, expenditure functions, etc. One last thing I want to point out is the object codes section. This is important to know where to find because these are needed for reporting expenditures. For those GAAP governments that report proprietary activity, you can also find guidance on determining operating and non-operating revenues and expenses. And this includes a matrix that identifies the classifications as they are reflected in the filing system. Let's look closer at the BARS account exports page. This is where governments can download a list of all BARS codes applicable to their specific government type and basis of accounting. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Before we move on, in the second paragraph, you can see there is a fiscal year 2025 codes to fund matrix. This is a great resource for the governments that utilize multiple fund types, like our cities and counties. This matrix lists the BARS code and the fund type they are allowed in, which will come into play later. At the bottom of this page, you'll see these sets of options. I'm going to just walk you through what these different export options mean, and then we'll put this into practice later during an exercise. First, select your government type. If you are a city, select city town. If you're a fire district, select fire protection district, and so on. For basis of accounting, you would all select GAAP. Now for export type. You can choose whether you want Excel or PDF. The PDF version is nice because it's print ready. So if you like to print and handwrite notes, that might be your choice. The Excel version is nice because it's easy to filter and sort the codes. If you like to take electronic notes, the Excel version might be the one you pick because it's easy to add a column and put your notes in it. Both options are nice, so try them both out. Reporting level has two options: above and prescribed only. If you select PDF, you'll automatically get above and prescribed, even if you select the other option. But if you select Excel, you can choose other options. We recommend always selecting above and prescribed because that gives the category of the BARS codes, so you can easily find codes related to public safety or utilities, etc. After selecting all the export options, you'd click Download BARS Accounts. The image on the left is a snippet of the BARS account export in PDF, and on the right is the Schedule 01 template. The BARS account export will include all available codes for your government type and basis of accounting, and includes the definition of each code. This is helpful to use when preparing the Schedule 01 template, because as you can see, the template does not include the definitions of the codes, only the code title. Now we are to the budgeting chapter. This explains the budget process, requirements, and how to amend the budget. For today's training, this chapter will not be relevant. Therefore, we'll move on to the accounting chapter in the BARS manual. This is the best place to start if you are ever thinking, how do I record this transaction? Because having the correct accounting for your transactions helps to ensure that your annual report is accurate when you report to SAO. Some highlights to remember for this section include accounting guidance on how to account for liabilities such as compensated absences, pensions, etc. Also, an area we get a lot of questions on is how to account for interfund activities, such as interfund transfers, interfund loans, reimbursements, netting, etc. The reporting section is where you'll find guidance on how to report your accounting and financial activity to SAO as part of the annual report, including instructions on how to prepare the different components. Some key things to remember in the reporting chapter include reporting principles and requirements, which includes an overview of the annual reporting requirements based on your government type. This will give you a general idea of the components required for the annual report, but each component may have specific criteria that you'll need to evaluate to determine if it applies to your government or not. Then the supplementary and other information and SAO annual report schedule section will include instructions on how to prepare each component of the annual report, such as the Schedule 01, 09, etc. This is just the guidance for how to report the information and fill out the templates. We'll be spending more time in this section as we go, since we're focusing on the reporting instructions. That takes us to alerts and changes. Every year, we review the BARS manual and make changes to clarify existing guidance or add new guidance. The alerts and changes section gives a detailed description of what changed. The manual retains alerts and changes for the past 5 years. We sometimes issue what we call a BARS alert. And these are updates done mid-year that are hot topics, and we want to get the guidance out to local governments right away. These are sent out via email. I highly recommend you review this page every year so that you know what changes were made. I'll now pass it off to Kaylee to get us started with our first exercise of the day.
Thank you. Before we get into the exercise, I just want to quickly talk about the search function within the BARS manual. So when you're in the manual, you should see a search bar towards the top, and within that bar says Search BARS GAAP. This is where you'll search for all BARS related topics. So as you can probably guess, our first exercise is practicing how to use the BARS manual search function. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this training, to participate in the exercises, you'll want to have the BARS manual open in a separate window and just keep that open throughout the training. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and do that now for our first exercise, and then go to our homepage, sao.wa.gov, and then select the BARS GAAP manual under the BARS and annual filing dropdown. And as you get there and the BARS manual is open, you use the BARS manual search to type in the term drainage and click search. I'll give everyone just a minute or two to get to the manual and search for that term. Okay, so once you've searched for the term drainage, in the search result, you should see bars code 53100 listed for storm drainage utilities. Now, when using the search function to find bars codes, it is really important that you have a solid understanding of your government's allowable codes. So, how can you confirm if this code is valid for your specific government type? Go ahead and put your answer into the chat on why or how you think you can confirm if this code is valid for your specific government type. All right, I see a couple options. So we're seeing download the chart of accounts, read the code description, and then I also see someone said use the bars code to fund type that Christy was just talking about. These are all great options. So for the purposes of this exercise, we would first want to download your government's chart of accounts to at least confirm that it is listed there, because that's how we're going to determine if that code is allowable for your specific government type. So that's what we want to do in this situation, because we want to emphasize that although the search function is great, it's a great tool and resource. But when using it, you just want to be cautious, because just because a bar's code is listed in the search results doesn't automatically mean that it's allowable for your government. So we want to make sure that we use the chart of accounts in conjunction with the search function. So before moving on, I did want to let you know about a new training that is available on our training and workshops page under the e-learnings library. Since we're talking about bars codes and how those are structured, this training is called Building Blocks of Bars Codes. And this is a great introduction training on the structure of a bars code and the different categories of revenues, functions of expenditures, etc. Because in conjunction with using the chart of accounts, figuring out if a bars code is allowable for you, just having that really solid understanding of your chart of accounts is really important, because in like the example, the 531 bars code, expenditures are coded based on the function that that expense is supporting. So you want to be really familiar with your government's functions, what's allowable, and things like that when you're trying to find the right bars code. All right. So just, and we have a couple of Q&A slides built in just to give us a chance to pause and answer any questions that are out there in the Q&A. I don't see any right now, but just a reminder, use that Q&A function if you do have questions that you want answered throughout the training. We definitely are happy to answer those throughout the training. So now we'll get into our next agenda item. This is where we'll be spending most of our time, and this is preparing the annual report components. So hopefully You have all had your post-lunch coffee, sugar, juice, whatever you need to stay awake and alert and are ready to get started. So let's get into it. The first component we're going to talk about is the Schedule O1. Other than the preparation of your actual financial statement package, the Schedule O1 is the biggest component of the report and is required for all local governments. The purpose of this schedule is to report the government's financial activity for the reporting year. This includes beginning balance, revenues, expenditures, and ending balances for all reportable funds. This financial activity is reported using bars accounts to identify the specific type of function or activity the transaction is supporting or the source of the revenue. Each reported fund is required to balance within $1,000 to submit the report. But don't worry, once you're at that step in the filing system where you're uploading the Schedule O1, it will notify you if any funds are out of balance by more than $1,000. We have created Schedule O1 templates for all local government types except for cities, towns, and counties. That's because those government types utilize essentially the entire chart of accounts and have more complex reporting, and they utilize a variety of different fund types. So there just isn't a way to create a template for them. And for GAAP governments, it's really basically a crosswalk from your financial statements into the Schedule O1, but utilizing the prescribed bars codes. It also includes a summary of your balance sheet transactions, so assets, liabilities, deferred inflows and outflows. One of the most important ways we utilize the Schedule O1 is we publish this data on our external website, so it's available for everyone to see. Our office strives to be transparent, and this is just one way we achieve that mission. So it's important that the data we collect is accurate. SAO is actually required by state law to produce and publish comparative statistics for all local governments. And in order to do that, we utilize the Schedule O1 data because the use of bars codes helps make that data that we collect uniform and easily comparable across all government types. We publish the data on our website via the financial intelligence tool, also referred to as FIT. So I know I just mentioned balance sheet accounts. So let's talk about what those are and define what these accounts are used for. Within each local government's chart of accounts, you'll find a series of 800 bars codes, which are referred to as the balance sheet accounts and are used to report information from your balance sheet or statement of net position, such as current and non-current assets, deferred inflows and outflows, current and non-current liabilities. These codes are applicable to all GAAP funds except fiduciary. And it's important to note that you must use the balance sheet from the GAAP proprietary and governmental fund financial statements and not the government-wide statements. Now we're switching gears a little and we're going to talk about memorandum accounts, which are only applicable to GAAP proprietary funds. These accounts are used to report financial activity related to debt and capital assets, which are not reported in the operating statement but provide valuable information. The collection of this data is necessary for producing comparative statistics, which, as I mentioned, our office is required to do. Essentially, these memorandum accounts are used for informational purposes only and provide valuable financial data that we would not be able to collect otherwise. Since these accounts are for informational purposes only, amounts reported to them do not impact the balancing of the Schedule O1. So you don't have to worry about that aspect. So let's talk about memorandum accounts for debt-related activities a little more closely. When debt is issued in a GAAP proprietary fund, no revenue or inflow is recorded on the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. Historically, since this activity is not recorded on the operating statement, it would have been omitted entirely from the Schedule 1 to avoid balancing issues. That prevents you from submitting the report, which we don't want. But without the use of these memorandum accounts, it would appear as though GAAP proprietary funds never issued any debt. And that really skews the comparative statistics and kind of just gives a false image of the debt activity of local governments. But now with the use of these memorandum accounts, we can remain transparent to our constituents and utilize and meet our requirements for comparative statistics. And we can see the accurate amount of debt issued across all local governments. And just like when debt is issued, when debt is paid or capital assets are purchased in a GAAP proprietary fund, no expense or outflow is recorded on the statement of changes in net position. The use of these memorandum accounts report the amount paid on debt and capital related payments and are collected, again, for informational purposes only to allow us to meet that statutory requirement for producing comparative statistics. As you can see, these memorandum accounts are the same ones you use to report these activities in governmental funds. However, the difference is when they are reported in GAAP proprietary funds, the filing system automatically knows to omit those amounts to avoid balancing issues. And if you want or need more information on balance sheet accounts or the memorandum accounts, we do have a really short 5-minute recorded training available on our training and workshops page. So if you want to watch that, that is out there and available. So now talking about the Schedule 1 and preparing it, it's important to have it in the correct format to avoid issues when uploading it into the filing system. Now, if you're using our template, it's already pre-formatted, so the intent is for you to only input the amounts where applicable and not alter any of the basic formatting. That means no additional headers, subtotals, comments, deleting columns, etc. And this really applies to all templates, so keep that in mind. Now, what you can do is if there is a line item on the template that doesn't apply to you, you can put in 0 into the amount field or just delete the entire row. Just make sure that you delete the row and not just hide it, because it will cause issues when you upload it into the filing system if it's just hidden. So this is just an example of the basic format of the template. As you can see, very basic. It's used to import the data into the filing system. Columns A through E must be formatted as text. Column F must be formatted as number. And then we have an exercise for the Schedule of 1. So again, if you want to participate, hopefully you still have the GAAP bars manual open in a separate window. We just recap how to get there in case you accidentally close it or change your mind and want to participate in the exercises. This is just how you can get to the bars manual, especially for those new folks here that this is maybe one of their first times interacting with the manual. So I'll just give everyone like 30 seconds, 1 minute. Once you're in the manual though, go to the bars account export section under the charts of accounts chapter. Okay, so now that you're on the chart of accounts export page, scroll to the bottom and you're going to download the chart of accounts for a GAAP county. So you'll select county in the drop down for government type and then select GAAP in the drop down for basis of accounting. You can leave everything else as the default options and then click download bars accounts. And you'll leave that open for the next portion of the exercise. But before we move on to that, I'll just give everyone a minute or so to get that file open. Okay, hopefully you all have that open. So for our exercise scenario, we have Sample County that is using bars code 38930 and their general fund and receiving an error when uploading the Schedule 1 into the filing system. So in the chart of accounts that you just downloaded, find bars code 38930 and read the description. Based on that description of the bars code 38930, why do you think the county is receiving an error for that bars code? And go ahead and put your answer into the chat. I'll give everyone a minute to read that description and then put your answer into the chat. Good, I'm seeing some answers coming through. So yes, bars code 38930 is only allowed to be used in fiduciary funds. And this is just the snippet from the chart of accounts because the purpose was to read the description. And in that description, you can see it says fiduciary funds only. So this is a good example of using the chart of accounts export in conjunction with your Schedule 1 and uploading that. Because if you do get that error, then you can review the description and see that there are special requirements for that bars code. And that is it's only allowed in fiduciary funds. So that's why they were getting that error. And then we have our second polling question. So launching that should be a pop-up on your screen. The question is, what resource in the BARS manual could be helpful in this situation? And that situation is the one we just talked about, getting that error in the filing system when using BARS code 38930 in the general fund. All right, see answers. Just leaving that up for a couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and sharing the results. So this is great. It's very close, almost tied between downloading the chart of accounts and codes to funds. And in this case, both of these options would be helpful in this specific situation. So let's just quickly recap what this exercise was intended for. So if you don't see a bars code listed on your Schedule 1 template, or you're just using a bars code and uploading it to the filing system and getting an error, want to make sure that you're downloading your chart of accounts for government type and basis of accounting to confirm that it is allowable. If you are receiving an error for using a bars code in a specific fund, You can download your chart of accounts to review the code definition. Sometimes it does indicate like fiduciary funds only, or you can utilize the codes to fund resource. And I want to take a closer look at that resource. So this is the codes to fund. And just a reminder, this can be found on the BAR's account export page. This can be a really helpful resource for governments that report multiple different fund types on the Schedule O1. And this is a snippet of what the resource looks like. As you can see, it's in Excel and you can filter for the code that you're looking for and see what fund types it is allowed in. And just to kind of tie that back to this exercise, so in this case, BARS code 38930, in the chart of accounts description of that code, it did indicate fiduciary funds only. Now, there are some codes that might be allowed in a couple different fund types, but it might not be indicated in the description. So that's why it can be helpful to use both of those resources if you are getting errors on your Schedule O1, because this resource will tell you exactly what fund types each BARS code is allowed in. Okay. Pausing for any outstanding questions. Okay, so let's get into the Schedule O1 crosswalk and then we will take our 10-minute break. So now we're going to talk about the Schedule O1 crosswalk. This is a really great component. It focuses on how to fill out the Schedule O1. If you recall the handouts that were sent via email yesterday, or you can find them at the top of this chat, those handouts correlate with this component. So you can refer back to those as you're filling out the Schedule O1. And it's also included in the slide deck of the PDF, but the handouts just give you a little bit more context. All right, so we're going to start out with an example of a crosswalk from the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in fund net position to the Schedule O1. So just keep in mind this is proprietary funds only. The image on the left of your screen is a snippet of the statement of changes for a GAAP water district. And on the right is a snippet of the Schedule O1 template for a GAAP water district. So if you're following along in the handout, the red number on the statement of changes corresponds to the red number over on the Schedule O1 example. You'll notice that some of the red numbers are duplicated, which indicates amounts that need to either be consolidated or separated into further detail for reporting on the Schedule O1. So looking at the statement, you will see the red number 1 for water sales. Then over on the Schedule O1 example, you'll also see the red number 1. You would take that $3 million amount and report it over on the Schedule O1 for water sales and services revenue. And moving down to operating expenses, I wanted to point out that depreciation and amortization lines, which have the red number 3, these will need to be consolidated and reported over on the Schedule O1 to the applicable 501 BARS code for depreciation and amortization for water utilities. One good double check here to confirm the Schedule O1 accurately ties to the statement is the total operating expenses on the statement in that purple box should be the same as the total amounts reported over on the O1 example, also in that purple box. The last thing before we move on, remember those memorandum accounts we just talked about a few minutes ago? I wanted to point out a couple of those on the Schedule O1 example, as shown by those 2 red arrows. These line items are for debt and capital outlay, but you won't find that information on this statement. But remember, it is required to be reported on the Schedule O1. So we're still talking about proprietary funds, but let's move over to the crosswalk from the statement of net position to the Schedule O1. You will see on the Schedule O1 example, there is the series of 800 codes that we talked about earlier, used to report the government's assets, liabilities, and deferred outflows and inflows. You will follow the red numbers on the statement where they correspond to on the Schedule O1. So looking at the statement, you'll see two line items with the red number 8 for cash and cash equivalents. So those would need to be consolidated and reported to the corresponding line on the Schedule O1. A good double check here as well is the amount on the statement for total current assets should match to the total reported to the red 8 and 9 over on the Schedule O1. So now we're going to move on to the crosswalk for governmental funds. So moving just a little more quickly since the basic concept is the same, but the governmental crosswalk is a bit more simplified. On the left of your screen, you'll see a snapshot of the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances for a GAAP health district that reports as a governmental fund. On the right of your screen, you'll see the snippet of the Schedule O1 template. Same thing as before, the red numbers on the statement correspond to the red numbers on the Schedule O1 example. So looking at the first line item on the statement, this is for licenses and permits. Now, depending on what exactly is included in this, there may be multiple bars codes used on the Schedule O1, but for the purposes of this training, we're going to lump it all into other non-business licenses and permits over on the Schedule O1. Then moving down to expenditures, depending on your specific statement, these might be at a higher level of detail than what is needed for the Schedule O1. You will want to either separate or consolidate amounts so that you're reporting salaries, benefits, supplies, and services, then any debt or capital as it applies. Last thing is the governmental crosswalk from the balance sheet into the Schedule O1. Again, same concept. Each red number corresponds to the applicable line on the Schedule O1. And looking at the statement on the left, you'll see there are two number 9s, which would be consolidated to report one line item on the Schedule O1. Then looking at the total liabilities with the number 11 is just copied right over into the Schedule O1 as shown. So that's a really high level, quick overview of the crosswalk process. But this is just to kind of help give you a visual of what we mean when we say the Schedule O1 can be just a crosswalk from your financial statements into the Schedule O1, just utilizing those bars codes and kind of figuring out how to do that conversion. So again, remember those handouts you can keep and refer back to, gives you more details on what the crosswalk entails and some resources and things in the bars manual that will help as well. So with that, we will go ahead and take our 10-minute break. So it's 1:52, so let's reconvene here in 10 minutes at 2:02. Thank you.
All right, it is 2:02. I'll give everyone just a little bit to get back settled. Let's move on to the Schedule 09, also known as the Schedule of Liabilities. As the name suggests, this is used to report local government's liabilities. Both current and non-current liabilities should be reported. When reporting debt, it is reported at face value and only the principal amounts of the debt are reported. That means things like interest, issuance costs, premiums or discounts, etc., are not reported on the Schedule 09. Some examples of liabilities reported on the Schedule 09 are loans, bonds, pensions, environmental liabilities, lines of credit, leases, etc. When preparing the Schedule 09, it's important to utilize the instructions in the BARS manual to identify the correct ID number to report the liabilities. To find the right ID number, you'll first need to know the correct liability category to look under. We'll get into this more during the exercises when we put this concept into practice. So we have our third polling question, which is what chapter in the BARS manual can you find the Schedule 09 instructions? The chart of accounts, budgeting, accounting, or reporting. All right, give you guys just a little bit more. All right, a majority said reporting, which is correct. That's where the instructions are found, because the Schedule 09 is a really good example of how items are split in the BARS manual. The instructions provide guidance on how to report the local government's liabilities on the annual report, which is why it's in the reporting section of the BARS manual. Actual accounting or calculation of the liabilities is found in the accounting section of the BARS manual. Let's use pension as an example since it affects a majority of governments. The Schedule 09 instructions provides the ID numbers to report the pension liabilities on the schedule, but the guidance on how to do the calculation is found in the accounting section. With that information, I will pass it off to Kaylee to get us started with our Schedule 09 exercise.
Thank you. So yes, our next exercise is related to the Schedule 09, and it's just going to help take some of these concepts that we've learned and put them into practice. So again, I know this is redundant, but hopefully you still have that separate web browser open. But if not, please go ahead and do that to participate in this exercise. So we're going to go to our website and open the GAAP BARS manual. Then once you are in the BARS manual, look for the reporting chapter on the left side of the page, expand that to find the SAO annual report schedules and expand that as well. And then click on liabilities with Schedule 09 in parentheses. So give you a minute to get to the Schedule 09 page. Okay, so once you are in the Schedule 09 instructions, find the 5-digit ID number or numbers for leases and put your answer into the chat. I'll just wait a minute or two so you get a chance to find those numbers and put them into the chat. All right, so I see some numbers coming through into the chat. So there are actually two ID numbers for leases. So you'll see there's 263.56 and 263.57. So once you can find ID number 263.56, what liability category is that ID number under? And put your answer into the chat. Yes, I see a couple people put it in the chat. So ID number 263.56, that is under the liability category, general obligation, debt, and liability. So now let's look for ID number 263.57 and what category is that under? Yes, I see some chats in there. Yes. So 263.57 is under the liability category, revenue and other non-GO debt and liabilities. So let's talk about this a little bit more before we move on. So going up to 263.56. So we established that this is under the general obligation, debt, and liabilities category. So that is when the government has pledged its full faith, credit, and taxing power. So that means the government would be obligated to repay the debt using all available means, including raising taxes to the extent allowable by law. Now, you might be thinking, we're talking about leases. That seems a little extreme. So, this would be extremely rare that a government would ever have this type of obligation for a lease. Now, that doesn't mean it is 100% impossible. However, we have yet to see an instance where it would meet the general obligation definition. So that's why it's important to look at what category your debt and liability is under before identifying the ID number. Because if we look at 263.57, which is under the revenue and other non-GO debt and liabilities category, this is when obligations do not have a specific general obligation pledge. So this includes revenue debt, which is secured by a pledge of revenue from a particular activity, such as a water utility. So this is where we would most commonly use this ID number for leases. Because generally speaking, if you have a general obligation pledge, you're going to know about it. It is documented on the bond or loan agreement. So it's usually very clear that that is how you secured that debt or liability. So now with that, why do you think we have two different ID numbers for leases under different liability categories? Go ahead and put, your answer into the chat, kind of going off of what we just talked about. Yeah, so I see a couple responses. So why we have two different ID numbers for leases under different liability categories is because the liability categories are determined by how the government secures that debt and liability. So when you're completing the Schedule 09 and trying to identify the correct ID number, you want to first look at how your government secured that debt or liability, because you're going to need to figure out what category to look under first. So first step is figuring out what category and then looking for the correct ID number. So in this case, I know it's easy because when you're looking at the Schedule 09 instructions, you're looking for that word leases, and you're going to use the first ID number that you see. But if you keep going down that page, you see that there is a second ID number. And the difference is based on how the government secured that liability. So you want to make sure that you understand how that is determined, and then figuring out what ID number you're going to use based on the liability category. Then we have another polling question. So our scenario is Sample County Fire District number 5 has entered into a lease agreement for the first time and will need to report a lease liability. The district has the Schedule 09 instructions, but needs guidance on how to calculate the lease liability. So our polling question is, what chapter of the BARS manual can you find guidance for lease calculations? All right, couple more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end that poll and then share the results. So majority of you did select accounting, which is correct. So in this case, we're talking about trying to find guidance on how to actually do the calculation of the lease liability. And that's going to be found in the accounting section of the BARS manual. And this is just a snippet of where the accounting guidance for leases is, because we're kind of, the purpose of this exercise was connecting when to use the accounting chapter versus the reporting chapter. So when you're needing to fill out the Schedule 09 specifically, you're going to use the reporting Schedule 09 instructions. But if you need guidance on the actual accounting of liabilities, you're going to go to the accounting chapter of the BARS manual and then look under the liabilities section and then select the type of liability you're wanting guidance on. So in this case, leases. And as you can see, Olivia, will you advance the slide? Sorry, please. Thank you. So as you can see, this is a snippet of that lease section. So we have the accounting chapter, and then we have leases under the liabilities section. So let's do a quick recap of the Schedule 09 exercise that we just did. So again, remember the instructions on how to prepare the Schedule 09 and the prescribed ID numbers are found in the reporting chapter of the BAR's manual. When determining which ID number to use to report your liabilities, first identify the correct liability category. And in addition to that, remember that the liability categories are based on whether the government has pledged its full faith, credit, and taxing power on securing that debt or liability. And as we wrap up the Schedule 09 section, we're going to talk briefly about the template and how to prepare that, because now we know where to find that accounting guidance and reporting instructions, and now it's time to fill out the template. So this is an example of the Schedule 09 template. As you can see, we're not altering the basic format. If you're using the template from our website, it's already pre-formatted for you, and it's just designed to import the data into the filing system. So that means don't add or remove columns. There's no totals or subtotals or extra headers, things like that. Format has to be very simple for the data input. When completing the Schedule 09 template, you'll input the ID number as prescribed in those 09 instructions, then a description of the liability. If you have filed before, you may notice that the maturity date column has been removed, which was published in the most recent BAR's update. So you'll go straight to reporting the beginning balance, additions, reductions, and ending balance for each liability reported. And then when inputting the amounts, report all amounts as whole numbers. So no cents, because that can cause variance issues when uploading, since each line item must balance within $1. And if you add cents to your template, once you upload it, the filing system rounds it up or down. So sometimes the cents can cause a variance issue. And then I do have a question out before we move on. Where is the Schedule 01 and 09 templates are located on the website? So if you have that separate browser open already, if you are, if you see the BAR's and annual filing tab up towards the top, if you click that, you should see the BAR's reporting templates page, and that has all of the templates for schedules for the annual report. And if you have trouble finding that, just let us know. We can send you the link. Oh, actually, no, Christy beat me to it. She put a link in the chat to directly to the templates page. And then I have another question on, so the question is how to determine the order of the list. Now, please let me know if I'm misunderstanding this question, but I'm assuming you mean the order of liabilities reported on the Schedule 09. So that is not a requirement. So when you're filling out the Schedule 09 template, we don't require them to be in any specific order. Once you upload the template into the filing system, it does some fancy programming to reformat it into a professional version. That's the one that you typically see in your audit reports, and it's the final formatted version. That's where we automatically put them into the right categories. So you'll see a header for general obligation, debt, and liabilities. And then you'll have the ID numbers that you used on the template under that. So we already automatically organize that and list them in the order of the categories. And we know the categories based on the ID numbers that you use. So let me know if that did not answer your question or I misunderstood. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Christy.
Thank you, Kaylee. Let's move on to Schedule 15. The Schedule 15 is used to report expenditures from awards received from state agencies. Since we are reporting expenditures, you would only report items on the Schedule 15 in the year that those expenditures were recognized, which may be different than the year you received the grant revenue. Since we are discussing award money, remember to always confirm with the state agency to see if any portion of the award is federal in origin. Federal funding always stays federal funding, and there are instructions on how to report any mix of state and federal funding on the Schedule 15 and 16 instructions. It is also common for federal agencies to issue awards through state agencies or even local governments. So it's important to review those contracts and agreements to confirm if any portion originated from a federal source. This is generally identified by an ALN, which stands for Assistance Listing Number. So let's do an exercise to put those concepts into practice. In 2025, Sample County was approved for a grant from the State Department of Transportation in the amount of $25,000 for rebuilding roads. In 2025, the county spent $50,000 on the project. They will be reimbursed in 2026. What year would the county report a Schedule 15? Put your answer in the chat. All right. I'm seeing a lot of 2025s, which is correct. It's 2025 because that is the year the expenditures actually occurred. And since this schedule is dealing with expenditures, we use the year in which they occurred. For our second part of this exercise, what amount would be reported on the Schedule 15? Put your answer in chat. All right, I'm seeing a lot of 25,000, which is correct. So for the Schedule 15, you can only report expenditures up to the award amount. So in this case, this county was approved for $25,000. So they can only report the expenditures up to that 25,000 because that's the part the state is taking care of. The other 25,000 to make the total 50 is the county's own funds that they had to put towards this project. So it's 25,000 for the state. They're going to reimburse that. And so the county only has to put 25,000 of their own money towards this project. Sometimes we get questions for this, so I'm going to pause a little bit in case you need to type something. Not seeing any questions. We can always come back, but I do know sometimes there's questions on that. So let's move on to the template. This is the Schedule 15 template, and we'll talk about what you'll need to fill this out. First, you'll need the 7-digit bars code for the state agency, which can be found in the chart of accounts. Then the program title. This is the award program, which usually comes from the state agency you received the award from. Then you'll input the identification number. This is usually an identifier signed by the awarding agency to identify the program, but it's not always included. So if you don't see it on the paperwork, input NA for not applicable. Lastly, input the amount. Remember, this is only the amount of the award that was spent in the reporting year. So moving from the Schedule 15 to the Schedule 16. The Schedule 16 is similar to the Schedule 15, but now we're talking about federal awards. The Schedule 16, also referred to as the CEFA, is used to report expenditures from awards received directly or indirectly from federal agencies. That is important to remember. It is only reporting the expenditures that are or will be covered by the federal award. Just like Schedule 15, it is reported in the year that the expenditures occurred. Direct federal awards are received directly from the federal agency, and indirect federal awards are received indirectly as a pass-through from a third party, such as a state agency, local government, etc. It is very important to prepare this schedule carefully to ensure that it is accurate and complete. There are strict reporting requirements and other criteria that goes into the schedule due to audit requirements. So let's practice on the Schedule 16. For this exercise, in 2025, the City of Sample received an advanced federal grant in the amount of $100,000. This was not a reimbursement grant, so the city must determine how it will be spent. In 2026, the city spent $50,000 to help restore buildings from flood damage. What year would the city report a Schedule 16? Put your answer in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of 2026s, which is correct, since that is when the city spent the money. Next part is what amount would be reported on the Schedule 15. Or 16. Put your answer in the chat. Seeing a lot of 50,000s, which are correct. So let's move to the template for the Schedule 16. When it comes to completing the Schedule 16 template, just like any other template, it is important to not adjust the prescribed format. Do not add any additional columns, totals, subtotals, etc. Remember, the templates are just used to import the data into the online filing system. You'll start with inputting the 5-digit ALN in column B. This is where you indicate yes if the program was related to COVID-19. If it wasn't, you can leave this field blank. Then columns C and D can actually be left blank because once you upload the template into the filing system, these will get auto-populated based on the ALN. Then as the award was received indirectly by a third party, you'll input the pass-through agency name into column E. If the award was received directly, this field should be left blank. It is important to make sure that the field is completely blank for direct awards because even inputting NA or none will trigger the filing system to think it's an indirect award. The other award ID number is used for all indirect awards. So if you report a pass-through agency, you'll be required to include the other award ID number. For direct awards, this field is optional and can be left blank. Now we are on to column G. If the award is research and development, R&D, input yes. Otherwise, leave this column blank. Then column H is when you'll input the total federal awards expended. I wanted to make sure I draw your attention to column I. Of the total amount of federal awards expended, report how much of that was passed on to sub-recipients. The thing I wanted to point out is this column is numeric values only. So if no amount was passed on to recipients, leave it blank. Lastly is the footnote reference. If applicable, enter the reference number that corresponds with the notes to the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Which leads us to our next part, which is the Schedule 16 secondary component that is required as part of the annual report, which is the notes to the CFA. This is separate, and it is a separate form than the Schedule 16 template, and it is attached separately within the annual filing system. Going back to earlier this afternoon when we talked about this, when completing the notes to the CFA, is there a template for the CFA notes on the BAR's reporting templates page? I would tell you to put your answers in chat, but you got an easy one. No, there's no template document on the BAR's reporting templates page. To complete the notes to the CFA, you'll copy the template directly from the Schedule 16 instructions in the BAR's manual into a Word file, then make the necessary edits. Here is a snippet of what the template looks like within the Schedule 16 instructions in the BAR's manual. So you'll copy this information into a Word file to complete the notes and attach it to your annual report. On to our fifth polling question. For Schedule 15 and 16, do you report revenues or expenditures? Give you a bit more time. All right. Let's take a look. 100% said expenditures, which is correct. They are the schedules of expenditures, whether for federal or state awards. Moving on to the last component of the annual report, which is your government's financial reporting package. The SAO annual report schedules we covered already are required in addition to the GASB requirements. Because the SAO schedules are required as part of RCW 4309-230. Essentially, this means even if the schedule of liabilities is included in your financial reporting package, it is still required to be completed in the SAO prescribed Schedule 09. We work to ensure that the SAO legal reporting requirements for local governments in Washington are consistent with the national standards of financial reporting prescribed by the GASB. These requirements include the basic financial statements, including notes to the financial statements, required supplementary information, including the MD&A, which for those who don't know stands for the Management Discussion and Analysis, and then the supplemental schedules. And with that, we are through all the annual reporting components, and I'll pass it off to Kaylee.
Yes, I don't see any questions out in the Q&A, so we will get into our last agenda item, but if you have questions, definitely submit those through the Q&A, and we can make sure we address those before we end the training. So we're at our last agenda item, which is training and resources. So we are just wrapping up with additional training and resources that are available to local governments to help during the filing process. And we do have our last polling question. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. So it should be up on your screen now. The question is, if you have filed before, have you ever used the virtual chat assistant in the filing system? And if you haven't filed before, maybe you're just intrigued about what this is. Give that a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, sharing the results real quick. So lots said yes, you have used it. No, but it sounds great. So maybe those are the people that haven't filed before, and that is fine because we are going to actually talk about what that is. So if you have filed before, you may remember last year we implemented a brand new chat feature in the filing system, and happy to report that it's been a huge success in its first year. We received a lot of positive feedback from local governments, and that is always great to hear. We really try to make sure we do what we can to make this process efficient and you have the resources and help you need. This chat feature is found directly in the filing system after you log in, and there is a virtual chat assistant that will greet you and provide guidance and resources for common issues like templates, training, etc. And that you can see with those bubbles, you can see the options that you can select, but you are not limited there. You can also type in the topic you're hoping to get help on, such as pension or compensated absences or leases, like we were talking about earlier. And the virtual chat assistant will provide you with links to available resources on those topics, somewhere either on our website or the BARS manual. And if you're not able to get the help that you need, there is an option to request to chat with a filing specialist. Now, this is only available during peak times, so generally March through May. March, we usually have it on as available part-time, but April and May, we are full-time Monday through Friday, 9 to 3. And this is where you can chat with one of us in real time, similar to an instant messenger. And you can ask questions, get help. We can help point you in the right direction. But please note though that the virtual chat assistant is available all year. So if you go in there in July and you're making changes to your report and you're looking for some guidance on the schedule 15 or 16, you can use the virtual chat assistant and just type in the schedule and it will provide you with the applicable links to the different bar sections. So let's talk about the BARS and annual report filing FAQs page, which can be found under the BARS and annual filing tab on our home page. So there are some great resources and guidance on this page, but I wanted to specifically focus on these two in the orange box, the handbook and the error guide. These are both PDF documents that get updated each year and can be used to help you through the filing process. And we're going to take a look at what each of these resources entail. Starting with the annual filing handbook, this is really a comprehensive guide that walks you through the entire filing system and how to import these various components. And looking at what you'll find inside the handbook, as you can see, there are written instructions for each step, plus screenshots and arrows to help point you in the right direction. This is a really great resource if you're someone that prefers to go at your own pace and you prefer written instructions versus maybe watching a training video. So this is just going to walk you through the entire filing system, and it will include a summary of all of the different components that we talked about today. So it's very comprehensive. It includes what we talked about today, but also how to actually import that into the filing system. Now let's talk about the error guide. This is also a great resource to have up as you're filing your report, but this guide is focused on understanding what errors you may see in the filing system and how to correct them. And this is what you'll see in the error guide. You can see we have a description of what each error means and tips and tricks on how to resolve them. So you can see we have some background information. This just further defines what that error is, what it's looking for, things to keep in mind. And then we also provide BARS manual links, and this will take you to specific sections in the BARS manual that gives you even more guidance on that particular topic. So let's jump over to our training and workshops page because we also have some great resources here as well to help you with filing and other BARS related topics. And if you haven't been to our training and workshops page, definitely check this out because we have a ton of great recorded trainings under our e-learnings library. And this is where we publish all of our recorded trainings. So you can find all things BARS and annual filing. So we have like a recorded BARS update, we have recorded filing trainings, we have recorded trainings on specific BARS topics, like compensated absences. There's a recorded training on that as well. But for the purposes of this training, I wanted to specifically draw your attention to the newest published training, How to Navigate the Annual Filing System. This recorded training walks you through the filing system and how to import the components we talked about today. So this is just all about how to navigate the actual filing system and importing all of the things that we talked about today. We, of course, have to finish out our annual report training with a reminder of the deadline. So for calendar year and governments, your annual report is due by Saturday, May 30th. So please write that down, put it on your calendar, and pretend that the deadline is actually Friday, May 29th, because no one wants to be filing their report on a Saturday. And also just a reminder that since the deadline does fall on a weekend, SAO will not have support staff available to assist with filing questions on the actual deadline. So definitely start your reports early to allow time for questions, get assistance if you need it. So definitely start early and just try to make sure you get that done before the weekend, and then you can just relax and enjoy yourself. And then I did have one question in the chat. So if anyone is needing a copy of the slides, scroll up to the very top of the chat, and I attached the crosswalk handouts and a PDF of the presentation slides. And we also sent an email out yesterday with those same attachments. And if you need to get a hold of us for questions about annual reports, you can email our support inbox, lgcsfeedback@sao.wa.gov. Use the help desk for those more complex, maybe unique accounting and reporting questions. But these are both great ways to get a hold of us, and we can get you pointed in the right direction if we're not able to assist. And that concludes our training for today. So thank you, everyone. And just a reminder that the survey will pop up once the webinar ends. It's just those two questions. What is something you liked about today's training? And if there's anything we can improve on for next time. So again, we appreciate you taking the time to give us feedback and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.